Hey guys, it's Gimpanzeetutorials. Today I'm going to be going over Gimp, which is a program I use mainly for manipulation of photos and logo design and a bunch of other neat stuff. Now, what is Gimp? Okay, Gimp is a photo manipulation program that's freeware and it's open source, and basically it allows you to do a bunch of different things. You can change the color, apply distortions to a picture, change the distortions to a picture, mess with the background, create your own images and graphic design, save images in multiple different formats, even in Photoshop, although it's on Gimp. It's also supported on basically every platform, Linux, Windows, Mac, pretty much everything out there, and it's available in almost every language there is. Now, there are a couple competitors to Gimp, and the most popular one is Adobe Photoshop. Now, Photoshop, I'm sure everyone has heard, it's pretty much Gimp, but more expensive, and it has a bit more filters and a bit more dumb vid. Now, Photoshop is great and all if you want to spend money. I mean, of course, you could just look up for a cracked one online and download an illegal version, which, I mean, if you're just messing around with filters, I'm not encouraging it, but sure, you could do that. But if you're making quality art and trying to sell it, then you should at least buy it, because, I mean, that'd just be rude to not support what helps you make money. Other popular ones are Sumi Paint. Sumi Paint, you can basically, you can try it in browser, so you can create your own. You don't even have to download anything. You can just create a new canvas. Basically, it's the same thing as all these other programs. There's filters, you can do 3D effects, blur, the same thing as other programs. Basically, it's the same. However, I don't recommend it compared to the other ones because the Pro version, which is $19, has a lot more filters and unlimited layers, and you're going to be able to need unlimited layers at some point. However, if you want to make artwork that's the same quality, this is a good program. Another competitor is Paintnet. Now, there's a lot of controversy about Gimp versus Paint. Now, here's a screenshot of Paintnet. Basically, it's the same thing, and it has, as you can see, the tools and colors, layers, pretty much the same thing. And, however, the only thing I would say that makes Gimp a better program is the fact that the community on Gimp is a lot larger, the interface is better looking and easy to use, and compared how many effects you can apply to things, Gimp just has a lot more effects. However, Paintnet is a very clean version. And the last one would probably be Inkscape. Now, this is a picture of Photoshop, not Inkscape. As you can see, there's brushes are open, different tools, your filters and everything, layers, colors. And another one is Inkscape. Now, there are multiple ones like Inkscape, and there's like Illustrator, CorelDRAW. Basically, these are made to make vector graphics, and there's two types of graphics when designing. You have vector, and you have raster. And the difference between these can be very large. For example, with raster images, normally you can create higher detailed, because they're easier to create detail on them and apply more filters and effects. However, you can't scale the image and retain the same effects, the same quality. So if you took a raster image that was small and you scaled it up large, the image quality would disappear. Or even if you scaled it down to a smaller image, it would be really fuzzy and just not look good. But with vector images, you can scale them however you like, and it will still remain the same quality, which is very good for certain graphics, and I'll explain that later in another tutorial. So now that once you download Gimp, open it up, you'll run through the loading screen. Okay, so what you want to do, go to File, Create New, which is at the top here. Now these are the default settings, and you can change these to inches, feet, yards, whatever you want basically. There's also some advanced options, and this stuff is just the resolution. You don't really need to worry about that. You only want to change the resolution to higher if you're making website graphics or something that needs to be really high quality for advertisement. Most of the time, just don't worry about it. So create a new layer. I'm going to maximize it here. Now, let's get started with the toolbox. That's this box up top left. Now you have multiple tools you can select. I'm just going to run through each of them really quickly. So, to start, you have the rectangle select tool. Now this, you can just easily create a rectangle, fill it in with any color, change the dimensions maybe, or even have a fixed ratio. Basically what this is your size is always fixed. So if you had a 2:1, 2 pixels of the width is just 1 of the height, which can be very useful for creating exact graphics. And there's also, you can give it rounded corners, so it's more pill-shaped, and a bunch of other stuff. There's also the oval select tool. Now this is basically the rectangular, but it's not a rectangle, obviously. There's also the free select tool. Now using this you can draw and create your own selection. Now I wouldn't suggest this, considering it's hard to use accurately unless you're like really up close on something and making lines, because just drawing normally is really hard. There's also the fuzzy select tool. Now I'm going to show what this does with a photograph. So choose the Mesa art, and I'm just going to copy this. Here we go. So fuzzy select tool, basically you have a threshold of what it selects. So if I want to select the if I want to select the top of this, the only top of the picture, I'm going to have to change the threshold until I get the entire top half of the image. And it's sort of tricky because it doesn't always work. But as you can see, that's most of the image. And then if I want to select the bottom, then the entire image. There's also the select by color, and this is useful for if you're only trying to eliminate certain colors. If you change the threshold, you change the color, the range of colors that you're looking for. So just a blue, if the threshold was low and it was on blue, it only selects that range of blue. If the threshold was on high for blue, it would select all of the blue. There's also scissors, and you don't have to worry about this. This is just cutting out certain parts of the image. I rarely use it. There's also foreground select. Now, this is useful if you're only trying to edit a certain parts. I don't really use this that often, but you can select your foreground part that you want to stand out from the image, and it will refine and mark it. Then you need to mark the background, and then you're only working on the part of the foreground. It's also the paths tool. Now this is very useful if you're trying to render out images. So basically, you have a movable line with a bunch of little joints. You can move these joints however you like. And once you move them, you can also create curves out of them. And you just do this by clicking and dragging and then moving the adjustable points. So that's very useful if you're trying to render a certain character or image out of something. And as you can see, I just rendered that all out. There's also the color picker, and this is just you select whatever color you want, and it's really simple pretty much. I mean, every program has this, even MS Paint. But you can see the color change as I go over different colors. You can change the average, so you pick a radius of colors as seen in the box, and so it's more blended, which is useful for sometimes. I don't really use it. It's also the zoom. Now, I don't actually use the tool itself. I just press Control on my keyboard and scroll in and out. There's also bottom left of your screen is a drop-down menu to change the zoom, and that's very useful for certain things, like if you need the exact measurement of something. Also the measure tool. Now, this just measures the angles of an object to another object. Now this is useful for creating work that will be printed as like flyers or brochures or stuff like that. It's the move tool. This can be used to just move your object around, whatever it may be. The align tool. Now, this is just used to align it on either side of your image. And this is mainly useful for creating, again, work that will be printed. And there's also the crop. And basically, what you do is you select the part of the image you want to take out. So if I wanted only this part right here to be seen, I'd just crop that, and it would automatically cut out everything else. Rotate tool, pretty self-explanatory. Scaling, also self-explanatory. Gimp has a very good scaling ability. Shear. Now this is if you want to change the alignment, sort of, so like it's tilted. Perspective. This is very useful if you want to, say I wanted to create a 3D square. So I'd create the top of the square, and then just multiply it, and make the sides, and as such. Flip, you can flip it either side, up or down. Cage transform. Now this came out in the 2.8, the version that I'm using, and basically you create your points like the perspective tool, which you want to transform, and then you can manipulate the points and move the image however you like, so you can create your own warp effects. Fonts, you can change the color, doesn't really matter. Change the font type, size. You can even move it in certain places. There's also these little menus at the bottom, which allows you to change the spacing between them. And if you have a paragraph, for example, it also allows you to move the entire selection back and forth, or move it up and down, so you can have words closer to themselves or away. Now, there's also fill. Now this is just a tool that allows you to fill a selection of an area, or the entire area, and this is pretty basic. Gradients. Now, blending tool. It's listed as the blend, but I refer to it as gradients, because that's what you're using. It already comes with a number of gradients, and you can use this to create like a landscape, like shadows, light is mainly what it's used for. So say I wanted to create, I don't know, brushed aluminum. So what I do is click and drag, and it'll automatically pop up, and you can change this different ways and adjust how much you want. You can also change it so it's bilinear, so it goes in the middle. There's also radial, which is just circles, square, and then these ones are useful for creating a pop of an image. This is conical, and basically you can create a 3D point on the image. You can also do different shapes, ones, spirals, counterclockwise and clockwise. There's also another useful effect is FG to transparent, and basically what this does is you have your primary color, which is your foreground color, which is right here, and you have your background color, which is the one beneath it. And you can also switch these, and it starts off as black and white. And basically, you can either choose to go from FG to BG, which is the foreground to the background, so it goes from black to white. You can also flip these if you wanted to. Or you can go from only FG to transparent, which is just the foreground color, so you're only applying shadow to certain areas, or if you wanted to, light to certain areas. Pencil tool, this is just average pencil. You can select the different brush that you want from the drop down area, and it comes with a bunch of loaded brushes, but you can download them from a bunch of different websites like deviantart.com or gimper.net. Change the size, aspect ratio, angle, everything basically. It's also the brush tool. Now this is for drawing art, and you can change the opacity. So as you can see, instead of a pencil that's hard, you have different opacities already. The eraser, don't really need to explain anything there. Airbrush. This is like the paintbrush, but you're taking a spray can, basically, and you can change the motion and the rate, so you can have it go a lot faster, or you can change the flow, so only go in bursts, so it creates a sort of jagged effect. Also ink. This is useful for illustrations, if you're drawing, a bunch of different things. Most of the time, if you're using a tablet, this will be pressure sensitive, so it's really useful for creating realistic ink. Also cloning. Now, cloning pretty much deserves an entire tutorial on itself. Basically what you do with this is you select what you want to clone. Say I wanted to clone like this part right here. Everything on the bridge in the middle. You hold Control and then click on what you want to clone, and then you press left click and you clone over it. So here, for example, you can see I just rearranged the entire image. So I wanted to clone the sky, clone only a part of it, and the whole image is changed. You have to mess around with this because it doesn't always give you the effect that you want. It's also healing. I don't use this that often, but basically it's the opposite of clone, and it just puts every image back to what it should look like most of the time. Perspective clone, it just changes the perspective to what it should be. Blurring and sharpening. Now, blurring, pretty simple. Using it, you can really quickly create the effect of images closer or farther away, and the focus can change with the image. There's also another effect, sharpen, and basically you can run this over an image and make it pop more. However, the problem is if you use this too much, then as you can see little dots up here, like you're rubbing the image away. Smudge tool, changing the opacities can be useful for blurring stuff together. And dodge and burn, this is good for detailing. Now, you have different ones that you can apply, and shadows, midtone, and highlights. Now, the majority, you'll be using it on midtones, and you can change the exposure so that it's not as much to more, and mess with the opacity. Dodge lightens, while burning darkens the image. And that's all the tools for now. Now, this little box I have right here is called the layers, and you can open it by doing Control L, or going to the top of your screen, Windows, Layers, it'll pop up. Basically with this, you can add new layers. Imagine layering on paint to an object. You can add different layers, have them at different opacities, say this one is filled with an entire mainly black canvas. Now, you can change the effects so it's dissolved, overlay the image onto a screen so it gives a textured effect. There's a bunch of different things you can do with this. You really need an image to show you here. Okay, so I have this black layer over it. It's on normal. Now if I put it on overlay, the entire image in that area darkens. Screen would lighten it. There's also grain extract, saturation, which makes everything in here the black color. Grayscale, there's a bunch of different things you can do with this. Let's see, what else? File. When you save images, it's going to automatically save as a .xcf. You can select your file type by extension. Basically, an XCF is just a Gimp image, so it comes with all the layers in it. But when you want to save as an image so people can use it, you want to go to the export, and exporting, you can save it as a million different types of files. So there's, for example, HTML for websites, brushes and patterns for Gimp, JPEG images, which are less quality, PNG, which are more open rostered, which is what I was talking about earlier, even Photoshop images, because it's a cross-platform program. Windows BMP images, which are bitmap, which low quality, so I would advise staying away from those. There's a bunch of different images that you can create this, save as. Edit. It's nothing really important here. This is just like undoing layers, removing stuff, copying and pasting. Selects. This is basically like the rectangular select tool, except for the fact that it gives you a little bit more options for you to sharpen and shrink and grow the border and range of it by pixels, so you have an accurate measurement. View. Don't really need to worry here. Allows you to zoom in and out, but also show layer boundary, the guides, a bunch of stuff. Image. Now this is, if you want to change the size of your canvas, and your canvas is everything on the outside. As you can see, it's the which you originally created when you did a new. It's 640 pixels by 400 for the height. Now, the image, you can crop it to the selection, like with the crop tool earlier, or you can go to image and zealous crop, which won't be used here because that only crops images that it thinks are unwanted, and auto crop, which automatically crops to the full image, and every color, even if it's like on 2% opacity, if it's there, it'll crop around that image. Yeah, you can change the canvas size, scale the image. Now layer. Layers, basically your tool on the side. You can change the layer boundary size, and so you can manipulate it more and change the add layer masks, a bunch of different stuff. Colors. Now, you don't really need to worry about this. Most of the stuff is self-explanatory. The basic stuff, you can colorize it, change the hue, saturation, and lightness. You can change the balance in colors, so say you want it to look more red, and you can change highlights, all of that. Hue saturation. Now this is basically the same as the other tool that was the colorize image, except this only changes the hue. Threshold. This is just, you don't need to worry about this. This is just how much your image sees, like a flashlight in dark. Brightness and contrast. Now this is mainly used for editing pictures, and basically you have two levels that you can change for how bright or how much you want it to pop for the image. It's also levels and curves. These are basically the same. Your levels are adjustable darkness and lightness and contrast. And your curves are basically the same thing, and they change the image at different points. And there's also preset curves and layers and all this stuff, so you don't really need to worry about that. Posterize. This is just giving color. You can reduce the number of colors so it's only, say you want it to be more pixely looking, you can reduce it so it's only 16 different colors. See, it's much more set back and it's not as sharp though. So the more you add, the higher quality it becomes. You can also desaturate. There's lightness, luminosity, and average. So I always put it on average because most of the time you don't want to take away only the majority of the lightness or only luminosity, because if you get average, everything is grayscale, not just a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You can invert the image. This is useful if you're selecting. Say I'm only selecting this part right here. You can either press Ctrl-I, or you can go to Colors, Invert. You only invert that selection, like making a predator effect. Oh, I forgot to mention there's also the Select Invert. So these are different things. So Select Invert, which uses a Ctrl-I. If I was only deleting that part, I can press Ctrl-I and delete everything outside of it, the opposite of it. Tools. These are what I just showed you in the tool option box. Filters. This is a bunch of different stuff, and I'm not going to go into all of it. Just mess around with it. Basically, you have a few categories, or more than a few. You have blurring, and there's different things you can do with these. Blur only, like for that was Gaussian blur. Blur a certain amount of pixels. You can enhance it, move red eyes from pictures, distort it, there's a tool I like to use called Eye Warp, and basically it allows you, for example, say I took the spark brush, and I just created a new layer, and just move like a bunch of sparks, that direction. If I go to Filters, Distort, Eye Warp, it allows you to move or grow images, remove them, shrink them. You can also swirl them, which is a really interesting feature. You can change the amount you want to swirl. So, using the swirl tool, I just created a sort of fiery, weird, distorted effect. Now, of course, there's also a bunch of other distort ones like ripple and wind. These are good too if you're wanting to create like a watery sort of effect. You can change the wavelengths and how it affects it. A bunch of different stuff, so it looks like it's watery. Light and shadow. It's a cool ability for you to create supernovas. Noise. Now, noise is used when creating a sort of TV effect. So like a static image. So basically, say I had an entire background, I wanted to create noise. When I do the noise, you can change how it appears, and there you have a staticky looking image. Edge detect, you can make edges neon, blur them different ways. Generic, this is just like dilating images and making them pop. Combine, this is only if you want to merge a bunch of image to create like a panoramic effect. Artistic, there's tons of different filters here. You can make a canvasy effect, add a predator effect to the image, make it an oil, Van Gogh it. Decor, this is just like a bunch of added effects, borders, coffee stains, stuff like that. Map. Now, you don't really need to worry about this. This is mainly for creating 3D objects. So you could create an object, and say you wanted a sphere or a box. Go with the box. Okay, and as you can see, because this image is so large, it's taking a while to load, which is probably the only setback. Some of the filters, when you apply to them, will run slowly, even if your computer is like a supercomputer. Yeah, especially when creating 3D objects, because you have to give it parameters to work with, and it uses its own built-in 3D editor, which not all programs have, so it runs. It's very powerful, but the drawback is it's sometimes slow when creating large images. Okay, I'll save the boxing for later. But rendering, now this is very useful. You have multiple different choices. You can render nature and clouds and a bunch of other stuff. So say I wanted to have a sort of fog effect, and it's just that easy basically. There's also flame, and this is used for creating very interesting images. Basically, you can change the parameters that it gives you and create like all sorts of different colors and weird abstract sort of images. Oops. There's also web. This is just for websites, basically. Animation. I mean, you can mess around with this. This is just creating little animations. You can export them as animated .gifs, GIF, or you can just save it as an animation. It's pretty cool, actually. Alpha to logo. Basically, you can apply different effects to logos now, like glossy, frosty, chrome, a bunch of different things. I don't really use this because I don't really view it as my own creation if I do use this, and I mean, I've never even really looked at this part right here because I create my own textures, and most of this stuff, adding cow spots, and I could create that myself using my own ways. So say we wanted to, yeah, I'll show that later. Script foo. Now, script foo is basically plugins, and there's a whole community of plugins that do all sorts of different things. Here's the Bobination. It's okay. And it does all sorts of different things, basically, and you can download different ones. There's a registry, actually, of plugins. And basically, it allows you to download these scripts that people have created. And if you go to popular content, there's a bunch of different stuff, like drawing arrows, liquid, quick sketching, creating different old-style colors, waves that you can create with noise, photo effects. There's a bunch of different stuff. This is like just a quick way. I've used layer effects mainly. I haven't even really looked at the other ones, because layer effects allows me to do most of the things you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in Gimp. And this is like adding bevel and embossing in an image, so making it 3D, adding a glow to the image, it's a bunch of other stuff. And lastly, you have your windows. Now, windows is mainly your dockable dialogues, and dockable dialogues are these little boxes you see on the corners. And you remember this whole thing is all customizable, so you can change the opacity, change the theme, make it look better, whatever you want to do. And basically, say I wanted to look at only the paths. Now, paths are when you use the path tool to create something. As you can see, I just created a bunch of lines at the top, and you can use these to show the path or edit the path. And that's useful for if you make a mistake and you took a long time cutting the image out, but you lost the path, you can just quickly pop this up and then just cut out using that path only, or edit it if you made a mistake. There's also a color map. Now there's nothing in here right now because there isn't a lot of color. As you can see, it's only black and white. But if there is, it'll pop up with